If you're listening to this, you may drift off before the end. So before you do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Before we start, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, close your eyes. Just relax, take a deep breath, and let everything go. Good night. Now we can begin. The town of Everwell was always quiet, but tonight, an unsettling stillness filled the air. It was the kind of quiet that seemed to settle deep into the bones, where even the usual creaks of houses and whispers of the wind felt absent, as though something held its breath. The moon hung low, casting long, pale shadows across the empty streets. Its light filtered through the sparse clouds that drifted lazily across the sky. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the distant hum of cicadas, yet the silence remained. It was a silence that unnerved, as though the town itself was holding on to something not yet fully understood. It started with Emily. She had never been one to speak much, a quiet observer of the world around her. But on this particular night, she woke with a strange sensation that something had changed. The dream she had, a dream so vivid, so tangible, lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the images, the foggy landscape, the towering trees with twisted branches, the vast, empty plain stretching to the horizon. The dream was always the same. She stood alone in the middle of the fog, unable to move, as the shadows twisted and danced around her. But this time there was something new. Someone else was there, standing just out of sight, their presence undeniable, even if their face remained hidden. As the sun rose the next morning, Emily couldn't help but feel a strange pull. She thought about the dream again and again, unable to focus on anything else. And then, as if by some strange force, she overheard a conversation between two neighbors at the corner store. "Did you dream last night?" one of them asked. The other paused, looking at her with wide, startled eyes before nodding. "I did," she replied. "It was the same dream again, fog, trees, but there was someone with me." Emily felt a chill run down her spine as the realization hit her. The same dream, the same unsettling landscape. How was this possible? How could anyone else have experienced it? She wasn't the only one. Later that day, more people came forward. The baker, the postman, even old Mrs. Milligan, who rarely ventured outside. Each of them described the same dream, with the same details, the same feelings of being watched. And with each new account, the weight of the realization grew heavier. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was something far stranger, far more unnatural. The dream, whatever it was, seemed to be pulling them all together, dragging them into a shared experience that none of them understood. And all the while, the town of Everwell, with its quiet streets and whispering trees, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to unfold. As the day faded into night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that had already begun and was now slowly, inexorably, drawing them all closer. The weight of forgotten dreams pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She glanced out her window at the fog creeping in from the edges of the town. The same fog from her dream. It wasn't just a dream. It was a warning, the first part of something that had only just begun. The next morning, the fog was thicker than it had ever been before. It blanketed Everwell in a suffocating embrace, turning the world outside into a hazy, gray blur. The usual morning bustle of the town was subdued, as if the fog itself had muted every sound. The chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, the clatter of carts, everything was drowned out by the eerie silence that hung in the air. The fog crept along the streets like an uninvited guest, winding its way through the cracks in the town's buildings and curling around the street lamps, distorting their glow into ghostly halos. People moved about in it, but they seemed distant, as though they were walking through a dream. Emily stood at her window, staring out at the strange sight. Her thoughts kept circling back to the dream, and the words of the townsfolk she had heard the day before. She wasn't the only one. It seemed as though every person in Everwell had been touched by it. The dream was unyielding, relentless in its hold on their minds. It had invaded their sleep, woven itself into their lives, and now it was manifesting in the waking world. There was something undeniably wrong about it, something that made her skin crawl. She could feel the heaviness of the fog pressing against the windows, as though it were trying to break through, to pull her into its depths. The town square, usually bustling with the sound of children playing and merchants haggling, was eerily quiet. The fog was so thick now that it seemed to absorb every sound, every movement. It was as if the town had become a part of the dream itself, trapped in a waking nightmare that no one could escape. Emily ventured out into the mist, her footsteps muffled by the heavy air. She moved slowly, unsure of where she was heading, but some force seemed to be guiding her, drawing her deeper into the heart of the fog. As she walked, she began to notice something strange. The streets, which were usually well worn and familiar, seemed unfamiliar now. The houses, the lampposts, the alleyways, all of them appeared different, as though they were shifting, subtly changing as she passed. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, but the sensation remained. It was as if reality itself was warping around her. Her heartbeat quickened. Was it the fog, or was the town truly transforming before her eyes? She could no longer tell. She paused at the edge of the square, where the fog was the thickest. Her eyes caught a figure standing just beyond the mist. A person, their face obscured by the swirling gray. They stood motionless, as though waiting. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. There was something about the figure that felt wrong, something that pulled at the edges of her sanity. She called out, her voice muffled by the fog, but the figure didn't respond. They didn't move. The air grew colder, and the fog seemed to press in tighter, as if urging her to come closer. But Emily didn't move. Something inside her told her not to. She wasn't sure what she feared more, the figure or the fog itself, both of them unnatural, both of them pulling her towards something she wasn't ready to understand. The town had become a strange, half-forgotten dream, and she was beginning to question whether it was still her town at all. As the days passed, the fog seemed to settle over Everwell in a way that felt less like an atmospheric anomaly and more like a permanent presence. People moved through it now as if it were an extension of their lives, their steps slower, their eyes duller. Conversations had become fragmented, the words of the townspeople growing more distant, as if they were speaking from far away. The connection they once had with each other, with their town, was thinning, and no one could explain why. The dream persisted, haunting their nights, weaving itself into their waking moments. It was as if the boundary between the two worlds, the dream world and the real world, was slowly eroding. Emily was no exception. Every night she returned to the same dream, the same fog, the same twisted trees. But this time there was something more. The figure that had appeared in the fog, the one she had seen standing motionless, had spoken to her, though she could not recall the words. There was a weight to it, a heaviness that clung to her throughout the day. It was as if something had been unlocked, a door inside her mind that she didn't even know was there. One morning, as Emily walked to the market, something felt off. The fog had thickened overnight, but it wasn't just the fog that unsettled her. It was the people. They looked different. No, it wasn't their appearance that had changed, but the way they moved, the way they interacted. There was an unfamiliarity in their eyes, as if they were seeing the world through a haze of forgetfulness. And then, as she passed a familiar face, Old Man Pearson, who had always been the first to greet her with a friendly nod, something shifted. He looked at her, his eyes widening in recognition, but his expression faltered, as if he had forgotten who she was. His lips parted, but no sound came out. A brief moment of confusion passed between them, and then he turned away, walking in the opposite direction. Emily's heart began to race. She tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to her, gnawing at the edges of her mind. She had heard stories of people losing their memories, of moments slipping away like sand through an open hand. But this felt different. It wasn't just that people were forgetting. It was as if something was deliberately erasing them, erasing the very fabric of their being. Later that afternoon, she sat in the town square, watching the fog swirl around her like a living thing. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the world fade, and focused on the sensation of the fog around her. There was a coldness to it, a deep, pervasive chill that settled into her bones. As she breathed in, she thought she heard something. Whispers, soft and distant, but unmistakable. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. It was a voice that was both familiar and alien, a voice that seemed to pull at her memories, tugging them from the corners of her mind. In an instant, she was back in the dream. The fog was thicker than ever, suffocating her as it had the night before. The trees loomed around her, their gnarled branches reaching out like hands. The figure was there, standing just beyond her sight, but this time Emily felt something more. An overwhelming sense of déjà vu, as if she had lived this moment before. But when she tried to speak, her voice was lost to the wind. It was as though her words were being swallowed by the very air around her, by the fog that now seemed to pulse with life. The figure took a step forward, just enough for Emily to see their face, but the moment they did, the dream shattered, leaving her with only the cold, unyielding fog. And with it, a single, haunting question. Why can't I remember? The days blurred together as Emily tried to make sense of the growing mystery. The fog, which had once felt like a fleeting oddity, now seemed to be a constant, suffocating presence in Everwell. People no longer exchanged pleasantries on the streets, and the air felt heavy with unspoken fears. Conversations, when they occurred, were strained, as if the very act of speaking had become a challenge. They spoke in fragmented phrases, words trailing off into uncomfortable silences. Emily couldn't help but feel that something was slipping away from them all, like a memory that refused to be grasped, no matter how hard they tried. In the dead of night, Emily would wake up from her dreams, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Each night, the same fog, the same trees, the same figure in the distance, drawing closer with every step she took toward it. But the dream was different now. It was almost as if she was losing pieces of it. There was a void that had begun to grow in the corners of her mind, a place where something important used to be, but it was gone. She couldn't remember what it was, but she knew it was vital to understanding the dream, to understanding what was happening in Everwell. One morning, as she walked through the mist-covered streets, she passed the town's old library, a place she had visited countless times in her youth. The building was tall and ancient, its stone walls cracked and worn by the passage of time. The library had always been a comforting place, filled with the scent of old books and the soft rustle of pages turning. But now, as Emily stood before it, she felt a strange pull, a whisper in the back of her mind urging her to enter. It was as though the library held answers she didn't even know she was seeking. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of forgotten knowledge. The rows of bookshelves stretched endlessly before her, filled with volumes that hadn't been touched in years. It was quiet, save for the sound of her footsteps echoing against the wooden floors. Emily moved deeper into the library, her fingers brushing over the spines of the books as if they might hold some secret, some clue to unraveling the mystery. Her gaze fell upon a small, forgotten section in the back of the library, tucked away behind a pair of heavy curtains. The shelves here were old, the books bound in faded leather. As she walked closer, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over her. She had never been in this part of the library before, yet she knew these books, knew the titles before she even read them. The history of Everwell, the forgotten dreams of the town, the mist that never left the titles seemed almost too familiar, as if they had been planted in her mind long ago. She reached for one of the books, her fingers trembling as she pulled it from the shelf. The cover was worn, the edges frayed from years of neglect. She opened it to the first page, her eyes scanning the words, but as she read, her heart began to race. The book wasn't just old, It was wrong. The words were blurry, as though they had been rewritten over and over again, each layer more distorted than the last. It was as though someone had tried to erase the past, but the history refused to disappear, stubbornly clinging to the pages. One passage caught her eye. The fog of Everwell is a force beyond comprehension. It feeds on memories, erases time, and leaves only echoes of what once was. The dreams are not dreams, they are fragments of the past, forgotten by all who have walked this land, and when the fog thickens, the past will return. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The words felt familiar, as though she had heard them before. She looked around the room, the silence pressing in on her, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she heard something, a whisper, soft and distant. The fog, it was out there, waiting, watching. Suddenly, she felt the weight of something old and powerful, something that had been buried for years. The town was not just suffering from the fog, it was being consumed by it, and whatever had happened here, whatever had been forgotten, was about to resurface. Emily left the library in a daze, the heavy book still clutched in her hands, its contents swirling in her mind like a distant echo. The streets of Everwell felt colder now, the fog thicker, as if the town itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. As she walked back toward her home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just out of reach, hidden in plain sight. The words from the book echoed in her mind. The dreams are not dreams. They are fragments of the past. What did that mean? Why did it feel like the town, and everyone in it, was on the verge of remembering something they should have forgotten? As she walked, her eyes wandered over the familiar landmarks of Everwell. The small market, the old church, the crumbling schoolhouse. They were all the same, and yet they felt so different, like they belonged to a place she no longer recognized. The town felt like a forgotten dream, something that had once been full of life, but now seemed empty, drifting through time with no purpose. When Emily arrived home, she placed the book on the table and stared at it for a long time, as if trying to decipher its meaning. The passage she had read had unsettled her more than she was willing to admit. She knew she had to find out more, but where could she look? The library had already offered some answers, but they had only raised more questions. She needed something more, a tangible clue that would connect the fog, the dreams, and the strange sense of familiarity that had settled over her like a second skin. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the fog began to creep in once more, Emily decided to take a walk. There was something about the way the town seemed to shift under the veil of mist that intrigued her. It was as if the fog was more than just weather. It was a force, a presence, and it was hiding something. She wandered down to the old church, which had stood at the edge of Everwell for as long as anyone could remember. The building was tall and imposing, its stone walls weathered by centuries of rain and wind. The stained, glass windows, though cracked and faded, still cast eerie shadows on the ground. Emily had always found the church unsettling, its silence too thick, its doors too heavy, as if it were meant to keep something inside, something that the town had long since forgotten. She stood at the entrance for a moment, hesitating, but the pull, the strange compulsion to step inside, was too strong to resist. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, she entered, the air inside thick with dust and the faint scent of something older than time. The church was empty, the only sound the echo of her footsteps against the stone floor. The walls were lined with worn pews, the altar covered in a shroud of dust. But it was the back of the church that caught her attention. At the far end, behind the altar, there was a narrow, dark hallway that led to a door she had never noticed before. The door was old, its wood darkened by years of neglect. It seemed to call to her, its presence so subtle that she had almost missed it. Without thinking, Emily moved toward it, her hand reaching for the cold, rusted handle. The door creaked open, revealing a hidden passage that spiraled downward into the earth. Emily hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the darkness. The air grew colder the farther she descended, the walls closing in around her, as she made her way deeper into the unknown. The only sound was the faint whisper of her breath and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, winding beneath the very foundation of the town. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the bottom. Before her stood a small chamber, its walls covered in strange, faded symbols. At the center of the room was an old stone pedestal, upon which rested a single, weathered book. It was identical to the one she had found in the library, the same faded cover, the same worn edges. But this one felt different. It was as though it had been waiting for her. Her hands trembling, Emily reached for the book. As soon as her fingers touched the cover, the room seemed to shift. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, casting an eerie light around the chamber. The air grew thick with a palpable energy, as if something ancient had awakened, and then a voice, soft and distant, but unmistakable, whispered through the room, "You've found it. The past has found you." Emily's heart raced as she opened the book, the pages filled with the same cryptic symbols that covered the walls. But as she turned the pages, one passage stood out, a passage that she had seen before in the library. The fog is not just a weather pattern. It is a veil between worlds. The dreams are not just memories, they are a call, a reminder of what has been forgotten. When the fog returns, the past will reclaim what is its own. The weight of the words settled over her like a stone. The past, the fog, the dreams, they were all connected. And whatever was waiting at the end of this journey, it was closer than she realized. The silence that followed Emily's discovery was deafening. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she stared at the words in the book, the truth settling in her chest like an anchor. The fog was not just a weather phenomenon. It was a boundary, a thin veil between this world and something else. The town of Everwell and all its people were caught somewhere in between, tethered to a past that refused to stay buried. And now, with each passing moment, the boundary between the two worlds was growing thinner. Her fingers trembled as she closed the book, the weight of its knowledge pressing down on her. She couldn't stay here, not in this hidden chamber beneath the church, with the air thick and oppressive, vibrating with an energy she couldn't understand. The walls, covered in the strange symbols, seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heart. Each step she took felt as though the ground beneath her was shifting, pulling her deeper into a history that was never meant to be remembered. She left the room quickly, retracing her steps through the narrow passage, her mind racing with questions. Why had the past been erased? What had the town forgotten? And most importantly, why was it coming back now? The further she walked, the more she felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her. It was as if the town itself was alive, waiting for something, waiting for her to unlock the final piece of the puzzle. By the time she emerged back into the church, the fog outside had thickened, a swirling mass that seemed to curl around the building like an ancient, invisible hand. Emily stepped outside, her eyes scanning the streets. The town looked the same, yet there was a palpable change in the air, a sense of unease that seemed to settle into the very fabric of Everwell. The fog clung to the buildings, to the streets, to the very air she breathed, as though it were a part of her now. It was suffocating, overwhelming. She needed answers, and she knew where to find them. The library had given her the first clue, the book had given her the second. But there was one person in Everwell who might know the full truth, the town's oldest resident, Mrs. Whittaker. She had lived in Everwell for as long as anyone could remember, and had seen the town's history unfold in ways no one else had. If anyone could explain what was happening, it would be her. Emily hurried through the fog, her footsteps quick and purposeful. The town's silence was unnerving now, the streets empty, as though everyone had retreated into their homes, leaving only the fog to occupy the space. The distant sound of a bell tolled from the church behind her, signaling the hour, but it seemed distant, hollow, like a warning. Mrs. Whittaker's house was on the outskirts of town, a small cottage that had stood at the edge of Everwell for decades. The windows were dark, and the front door creaked open when Emily knocked, as though it had been expecting her. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars of herbs, bottles of strange liquids, and piles of weathered papers. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. Mrs. Whittaker was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, her frail figure draped in a shawl. Her hair, once dark, was now white as snow, and her eyes, though clouded with age, were sharp and alert. She looked up as Emily entered, a knowing smile crossing her face. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. "You've found it, haven't you?" Mrs. Whittaker's voice was soft, but it held a weight of something ancient. The truth, the fog, the dreams, the town's forgotten past. Emily nodded, her throat tight. What is happening here? Why is everyone dreaming the same thing? And why is the fog growing thicker? Mrs. Whittaker sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her shawl. Everwell was built on a forgotten history, a history that was erased long ago, sealed away by those who feared what it might bring, the fog. It was meant to keep us safe, to keep us from remembering, but memories don't stay buried forever. The dreams are a signal, a way for the past to claw its way back into the present. She paused, her gaze far away, as though she were looking back through time. The fog is more than just a veil between worlds, it's a prison. The town's past, the things that were done to protect it, are all tied to the fog. And now, with each passing day, the barrier is weakening. The dreams are the key to unlocking the truth, to bringing everything back. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. But why is it happening now? What triggered it? Mrs. Whittaker's gaze turned somber, and her voice dropped to a whisper. The town is waking up. The memories are returning, and with them, the things we forgot. You may not be able to stop it, Emily. The past has a way of returning, no matter how much we wish it would stay buried. Emily felt the weight of her words settle over her. The past was returning. The fog, the dreams, the town's hidden history. They were all connected. But what did it mean for her, for the people of Everwell? And how long did they have before the past reclaimed what was its own? The fog had become something more than a mere inconvenience. It was no longer just a haze drifting through the streets of Everwell. It was a presence. Thick and impenetrable, it clung to the houses, the trees, the very ground beneath Emily's feet. Each breath she took felt heavier, as though the air itself was saturated with something ancient and forgotten. She couldn't shake the feeling that the town was watching her, its silence pressing in from all sides, suffocating her with its weight. As she left Mrs. Whittaker's house, Emily's mind raced. The old woman's words haunted her, the town is waking up. But what did that mean? What was the town waking up to? And why were the dreams the key? The questions swirled in her mind like the fog around her, each one leading to more uncertainty, more fear. She needed to understand what was happening, needed to find a way to stop it before it was too late. Her feet took her toward the center of Everwell, to the old town square. The square had always been a place of peace, a place where people gathered for market days or festivals. But today it felt wrong. The once bustling square was empty, save for the distant sound of a bell tolling from the church. The fog was thick here, swirling in unnatural patterns, as though it was alive. The old fountain at the center of the square had long since stopped running, its stone basin cracked and overgrown with moss, but today it seemed different. The water, stagnant for years, was moving slightly, but enough to catch Emily's attention. She stepped closer, the ground beneath her feet cold and damp, her breath fogging in the air as she leaned over the edge of the fountain. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a trick of the light, but as she looked closer, she saw the reflection. Not of herself, but of something else. A figure standing just behind her, its face obscured by shadows. Emily spun around, heart pounding in her chest, but there was no one there. The square was as empty as it had been moments before. Her pulse raced, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, to focus. It was just a trick of the fog, she told herself. A reflection in the water, a figment of her imagination. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She could feel it, something was wrong, something was watching her. A soft voice broke through the silence, startling her. You shouldn't be here. Emily turned to see a figure stepping out from the mist, a woman, tall and thin, with pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. Her clothes were old-fashioned, as though they belonged to another time. The woman's presence was unsettling, her gaze fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Who are you? Emily asked, her voice shaky despite her efforts to stay calm. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a step closer, her movements slow and deliberate, as though the fog itself was weighing her down. I was once like you, she said at last. I didn't understand what was happening either, but now I know, and you will too. Emily's throat tightened, and her eyes darted around the square, searching for an escape. But the fog seemed to press in on all sides, trapping her in place. She could barely see more than a few feet in front of her, the world around her reduced to shapes and shadows. What do you mean? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. What's happening to Everwell? The woman's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it, only something cold and foreboding. The dreams aren't just dreams, she said softly. They're memories of things that were never meant to be remembered. This town, it was built on something that should have stayed forgotten. And now, the past is coming back to claim what was taken from it. Emily's mind raced. The fog, she asked, her voice trembling. Is that what's keeping it away, keeping the past from returning? The woman nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Emily's face. Yes, the fog is a barrier, a wall between the present and the past, but it's weakening, and soon it will be gone. When that happens, everything will change, the town will change, and you will remember. Emily echoed, confusion clouding her thoughts. What will I remember? The woman's smile faded, replaced by an expression of sorrow. You will remember the truth of what happened here, of what was done to protect the town. You will remember why the fog exists, and why it's now unraveling. But be warned, Emily, some truths are more dangerous than others. The woman's words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fog. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of something vast and incomprehensible, something that would swallow her whole if she took even one more step toward it. Who are you? Emily asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's expression softened, and for a moment, she almost seemed human almost. I am a part of Everwell's past, she said, a memory just like the others, a memory that will soon wake up. Before Emily could respond, the woman turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the mist as silently as she had appeared. Emily stood frozen for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind reeling from the strange encounter. The fog continued to swirl around her, and the distant toll of the church bell echoed in her ears. Something was coming. Something terrible, and it was only a matter of time before the town of Everwell would remember everything it had tried so desperately to forget. The town of Everwell had always been a quiet place. Tucked away in the rolling hills, its inhabitants went about their days with a sense of peace, unaware of the shadow that loomed over them. But Emily now knew better. She couldn't shake the feeling that the fog, the strange recurring dreams, and the unsettling presence of the woman were all connected. There was a history here, one buried beneath the surface, just waiting to resurface, and she had to uncover it before the town was consumed by its own forgotten past. As the fog thickened around her, Emily wandered deeper into the town, drawn toward the old library. The building, once a place of learning and community, now stood in eerie silence. Its stone walls were worn, the windows darkened by layers of grime. The front doors creaked ominously as Emily pushed them open, her heart racing. The musty scent of old paper and dust filled the air as she stepped inside, the dim light casting long shadows across the wooden shelves. The library felt alive with secrets. She could almost hear them whispering to her, beckoning her deeper into the labyrinth of forgotten knowledge. Emily moved past rows of bookshelves, each step echoing in the stillness. Her fingers brushed over the spines of old books, each one a relic of a time long past. But it wasn't the books that drew her in. It was the feeling, the pull of something unseen, something waiting for her. At the far end of the library, she found a door hidden behind a thick curtain of ivy that had crept in from the outside. The door was old, its wood darkened by age, and it seemed out of place in the otherwise well-maintained library. It was as if someone had deliberately kept it locked away, tucked out of sight. Emily hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the cold brass handle, but something inside her urged her forward. She needed to know what was behind it. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. A wave of stale air hit her, and she stepped into a small room that seemed untouched by time. It was dim, the only light coming from a small window high on the wall. The room was filled with old wooden furniture tables, chairs, and a desk cluttered with papers, maps, and strange symbols. Emily's heart raced as she scanned the room. There was something deeply unsettling about the place, but she couldn't look away. On the desk, a large book caught her attention. It was open, its pages yellowed with age, the handwriting on the pages frantic and disjointed. Emily moved toward it, her hands trembling as she traced the words with her fingers. "The fog is the only thing that keeps us safe." She read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "But the fog is weakening, the barrier is breaking." The words sent a chill down her spine. Safe from what? And what was breaking? She turned the page, her breath caught in her throat as she read further. The town was built to protect the memory. A curse was laid upon the land, a curse that would trap the memories of those who lived here. A barrier was formed, a fog to keep the past from returning. But the past is waking, and the town will remember. Emily's mind reeled. A curse, a barrier. The fog was more than just a weather pattern. It was a physical manifestation of something far darker. The past, the woman had said, was waking up. The memories of those who had lived here were returning, and the town was on the verge of remembering something terrible. The sound of footsteps behind her made Emily freeze. She spun around, her heart pounding in her chest, but the room was empty. The door she had entered through was still slightly ajar, and the library outside was silent, but she wasn't alone. She could feel it. Something was watching her. The feeling intensified as she turned back to the book, her eyes scanning the pages in a desperate attempt to find more answers. But the words blurred, shifting in front of her eyes as though they were being rewritten. The symbols on the page seemed to writhe and change, twisting into something unrecognizable. And then the page turned on its own. Emily stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. The book was now open to a new page, one covered in strange, jagged writing. It was a message, a warning, and yet it felt like a command. Don't wake it. She read aloud. The memory will claim what is its own, and the town will fall. The weight of the words sank into her chest like a stone. The memory, it wasn't just something from the past. It was alive, waiting for the right moment to return, and when it did, the town would be lost. The fog, the barrier, everything was falling apart. Emily closed the book with trembling hands, her thoughts racing. She had to find a way to stop whatever was coming. But where could she go? Who could she turn to? The woman's words echoed in her mind, "You will remember." She took a deep breath and turned toward the door. It was time to leave the library and face the truth. The town was waking up, and she had to be ready for what was coming. Whatever the past had hidden, it was about to resurface, and Emily was at the heart of it. Emily stood in the doorway of the library, the weight of the book's cryptic warning heavy in her hands. The fog outside had thickened even further, pressing in on the town like a living entity. It clung to the streets, coiling around the houses and trees, muting the world with its dense, suffocating presence. The air felt thick with the promise of something inevitable, something ancient that had been buried long ago, only now beginning to stir. As Emily walked back through the library's aisles, she could sense that the walls themselves were watching her, their shadows stretching and pulling in unnatural ways. Every step she took felt like a countdown to something she didn't fully understand, but knew she couldn't escape. She needed to find out more about the curse, about the fog, and about the town's buried history. The answers were somewhere in this place, hidden beneath layers of time, and she would uncover them, no matter the cost. The door of the library creaked as she stepped outside, and a cold gust of wind hit her face. It wasn't just the fog that chilled her to the bone, it was the unnatural stillness of the town. There was no sound, no birds, no rustling leaves. The usual hum of life had disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence that felt wrong, as if the town itself was holding its breath. She walked down the quiet street, her mind racing. The strange woman's words echoed in her thoughts, "You will remember." But what was it that she was supposed to remember? What had been forgotten, and why was it returning now? She didn't have the answers, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that the past was reaching out to her, pulling her deeper into its web. As Emily neared the center of town, she spotted something she hadn't noticed before. A faded sign that hung crookedly on an old building, its wood warped with age. It read Everwell Historical Society. The building itself looked abandoned, its windows dark and covered in grime. But something about it drew her in. Maybe here she could find more answers. She could already feel the pull of the place, like a thread guiding her forward. Pushing open the heavy door, she stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. The once pristine floors were cracked, and shelves lined with old books, documents, and artifacts covered in a layer of grime filled the room. It was clear that this place had been untouched for a long time, but Emily wasn't deterred. She had a feeling this was where the answers lay. The room felt oppressive, the air thick with the weight of history. She moved slowly through the cluttered space, her eyes scanning the shelves, her fingers brushing the old spines of books that seemed to hum with energy. It was as though the objects themselves held memories of their own, memories long forgotten, buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. At the far end of the room, Emily spotted a large wooden desk, its surface cluttered with papers, maps, and photographs. She moved toward it, her heart pounding with anticipation. As she reached the desk, her eyes fell upon a large, yellowing map. It was a map of Everwell, but something was off about it. The layout of the town seemed wrong. There were streets that didn't exist, buildings that had never been there, and strange symbols marking certain locations she didn't recognize but felt strangely drawn to. She traced her fingers over the map, following the lines that crisscrossed the paper. The symbols were familiar in a way she couldn't explain, like fragments of a dream she had forgotten. Her pulse quickened as she realized that the map was showing something hidden beneath the town, something that had been sealed away for generations. A noise interrupted her thoughts. She spun around, but there was no one there. The door had creaked open slightly, and Emily could hear the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Someone else was in the building with her. She took a step back, her breath shallow, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The footsteps stopped, and for a long moment everything was silent. Then, a voice broke through the stillness. Looking for answers. It was a woman's voice, low and soft, yet it carried a weight of knowing. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know who this woman was, but the voice seemed strangely familiar, as though it had spoken to her in her dreams. She turned to face the source of the voice, but the room was empty. "Who are you?" Emily called, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you know about this place?" The silence stretched, thick and oppressive. Then, from the corner of the room, a shadow shifted, and a figure stepped forward. She was a woman, tall and slender, her face hidden beneath a veil of dark hair. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the woman's eyes met hers. There was something unnerving about her gaze, something that felt both distant and deeply familiar. I am the one who remembers, the woman said, her voice like a whisper in the dark. I remember the truth of this place, the truth of what lies beneath. Emily's heart raced. The truth. What truth? What had been hidden here? The woman took a slow step forward, and the air seemed to grow colder. The town was built to protect the memory, she continued, her voice becoming more urgent. But now, the memory is breaking free, and when it does, everything will be lost. The woman's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Emily didn't understand, but the fear in the woman's voice was enough to make her stomach churn. There was something terrible hidden beneath the town, and it was about to wake up. Emily's mind raced as the woman's cryptic words echoed in her ears. The memory is breaking free. What did she mean by that? What memory? The fear in the woman's voice had been unmistakable, but there was something else too, an urgency, as though she knew something that Emily had yet to understand. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, pressing in on her chest, and every inch of her body screamed to leave, to run from whatever this town was hiding. But the pull of curiosity was stronger. Something deep inside told her that she had to stay, that this was the moment that would lead her to the answers she sought. The woman's eyes were filled with ancient sorrow, but there was a flicker of recognition there, too, as if they shared a history that Emily had yet to remember. The woman stepped closer, and Emily instinctively took a step back. The strange figure was moving with a grace that made her appear almost ethereal, her footsteps light and almost soundless, like the whisper of wind through the trees. Yet the presence of the woman was so solid, so tangible, it made Emily's skin crawl. Every movement she made felt deliberate, as though it was rehearsed, as though this moment had been waiting for Emily all along. You have felt it, haven't you? The woman asked, her voice low and smooth, as if trying to coax a confession from Emily. The dreams, the pull. Emily hesitated, nodding slowly. The dreams had been unsettling from the start. The same recurring images, the shifting landscapes, the feeling that she was being watched from the shadows. At first they had been distant, impossible to grasp, but as the days passed, they had become more vivid, more real, and the line between sleep and waking had blurred. The dreams are not random, the woman continued, her eyes narrowing. They are the whispers of the past, of what was buried beneath this town. They were meant to stay buried, but now the earth is stirring, and the memories are waking up. Emily's breath caught in her throat. What's beneath the town? What's waking up? The woman smiled, a hollow, unsettling smile. It is a memory, one that was buried long before your time, before anyone's time. It is something ancient, something that should never have been forgotten, and yet it was. The woman's gaze shifted to the map on the desk, the one Emily had been studying earlier. The symbols on the map seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, their edges glowing faintly in the dim light. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. There was something she was missing, something just out of reach, and the more she thought about it, the more her mind strained to bring it into focus. The map, Emily said softly, her voice trembling. It's showing something beneath the town. What's down there? The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the map, her eyes darkening. It is a place that should not exist, a place that was sealed away long ago, for a reason. The ones who built this town knew what lay beneath. They made sure that the memory stayed buried, but it's never truly gone, and now. The woman's voice trailed off, as though she couldn't bring herself to say the words. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. Emily felt as though the walls of the library were closing in on her, the room shrinking with every passing second. The air was colder now, and a low hum seemed to vibrate from the very ground beneath her feet. I don't understand, Emily whispered. What was sealed away? What's coming? The woman's eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. You will understand soon enough. The town's history is tied to something ancient, something that feeds on the memories of those who live here. It waits in the dark, beneath the ground, and now, it is awake. The ground beneath their feet seemed to groan in response, as though it were alive, responding to the woman's words. Emily could feel it now, something ancient, something restless, stirring beneath the earth. It wasn't just the fog. It wasn't just the dreams. The town itself was alive with a pulse, a heartbeat that was slow and steady, but growing stronger with each passing moment. The woman stepped closer again, her eyes never leaving Emily's. "You've already felt the pull. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. We are all drawn to the memory, whether we want to be or not." A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the woman's presence was suffocating. It felt like the very air around her was thick with the weight of centuries, of things that should never have been uncovered. The woman's voice broke through the silence once more. "You will need to find the truth beneath the ground. It is the only way to stop it." Emily nodded slowly, the fear beginning to take root in her chest. The woman's cryptic words had done little to ease the growing terror, but Emily knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. The mystery of Everwell had entwined itself with her own life, and there was no escaping the past. As Emily turned to leave, the woman spoke again, her voice barely a whisper in the darkening room. "Don't forget, the truth will change you. It will change everything." Emily stepped out of the library, the weight of the woman's warning heavy on her shoulders. The fog outside had grown thicker, and the silence had returned. But now, she could hear something else, a low rumble, like distant thunder. The earth beneath her feet seemed to tremble, as though it was stirring, waking up from a long slumber. Emily's footsteps were muffled by the dense fog that enveloped the town, her heart racing as she made her way toward the outskirts. She couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching her, following her every movement with an intensity that sent chills up her spine. The woman's words still echoed in her mind. "You will need to find the truth beneath the ground." As she walked, the fog grew thicker, swirling around her like a living thing. It clung to her skin, dampening the air, making it harder to breathe. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground beneath her was pulling at her, trying to hold her back. But she couldn't stop now. The town was hiding something, and she had to uncover it before whatever it was fully awoke. The memory of the map from the library lingered in her mind, the strange symbols and the hidden path that seemed to lead downwards, deep into the earth. She had to find where it began, but where? The woman's cryptic warnings offered no clear answers, only riddles that tangled further with every step. As Emily reached the edge of Everwell, the houses grew sparse, their facades cracked and weathered, their windows dark and lifeless. The town's outskirts were eerily silent, save for the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of wood. The deeper she ventured into the abandoned parts of the town, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. The feeling wasn't just from the shadows, though. It was something else, something embedded in the very fabric of the earth, as if the ground beneath her feet was alive, aware of her presence. The air itself felt thick, as if the town were holding its breath, waiting. Her eyes scanned the landscape, finally landing on the ruins of what appeared to be an old church, its stone walls crumbling, overgrown with vines and moss. The church seemed out of place, standing alone amidst the decay, as if it had been untouched by time. A cold gust of wind blew through the open archway, sending a shiver down her spine. Something about the church felt significant, like a forgotten landmark from the past, a key to the mystery she was trying to unravel. Her instincts urged her forward. With each step, the air grew colder, and the eerie silence around her grew more oppressive. She entered the church, her breath visible in the frigid air, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. The air inside was thick with an almost tangible weight, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets. She stepped into the center of the church, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. The pews were long abandoned, covered in layers of dust, their once polished wood now dull and warped with age. A faint scent of mildew and decaying wood filled the air, mixing with the smell of wet earth from the vines creeping through the cracks in the stone floor. In the center of the church, a stone altar stood, its surface worn and cracked. The air around it felt heavy, as if it had been the site of rituals long forgotten. Emily hesitated, her eyes drawn to a strange marking on the floor beneath the altar. A symbol, one that resembled the symbols from the map. It was faint, worn with age, but it was unmistakable. Her pulse quickened as she knelt down, brushing her fingers across the worn stone. There was something beneath it, something that hadn't been fully uncovered. She could feel it, a subtle vibration in the earth beneath her fingertips, a pulse that matched the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Without thinking, Emily pushed against the stone, her body straining with the effort. Slowly, the stone began to shift, grinding against the floor with a low, reverberating sound that sent a shudder through the air. The ground trembled beneath her, and for a moment she feared the entire structure would collapse around her. But the stone slowly gave way, revealing a narrow, darkened opening beneath. Her heart pounded in her chest as she peered into the darkness below. The opening was small, but large enough to fit through. She hesitated, fear swirling in her gut, but the pull of the mystery was too strong. She had to go down. Taking a deep breath, Emily climbed into the narrow passageway, the walls of the church above her now a distant memory. The earth smelled damp and musty as she descended into the darkness, the only sound the steady thud of her heartbeat and the soft echo of her breath. The air grew colder the further she went, and the walls seemed to close in on her, narrowing as she moved deeper into the earth. It felt like an eternity before she reached the bottom, her legs sore from the climb. The passage opened up into a small, underground chamber, the walls lined with ancient carvings, symbols she recognized from the map. But the symbols were more than just markings. They were alive, shifting and writhing, as though they were part of something much larger. Emily's eyes widened as she took in the sight before her. In the center of the chamber, there was a stone pedestal, and upon it lay a small, weathered book, its pages yellowed with age. The book was open, as though it had been waiting for someone to find it. A faint glow emanated from the pages, casting an eerie light across the room. As she stepped closer to the pedestal, the ground beneath her trembled once again. She had no choice but to reach out and take the book. The moment her fingers brushed against its cover, the glow intensified, and a low, guttural hum filled the air, vibrating through her bones. Emily's fingers trembled as they closed around the weathered cover of the book. The moment she touched it, a rush of cold air swirled around her, and the room seemed to pulse with an energy that was both foreign and ancient. The hum that filled the chamber grew louder, vibrating through her chest, and the symbols carved into the walls began to shift and flicker like living things. The book's pages turned on their own, as if guided by an unseen hand, revealing a series of cryptic symbols and words that made no sense to her at first glance. Her heart raced as the light from the pages seemed to grow brighter, casting long, eerie shadows across the chamber. It was as though the room itself was awakening something deep within the earth stirring after a long slumber. With each turn of the page, Emily felt herself being pulled deeper into the mystery. Her mind raced to understand what she was seeing, but the words blurred before her eyes, shifting and rearranging as if they were alive. She tried to focus, tried to make sense of the strange language, but it was as if the words were slipping away from her, always just out of reach. And then she heard it, the whisper, faint at first, like a distant murmur in the wind, but growing louder, clearer, until it was a voice inside her head, speaking in the same cryptic language as the book. "It has begun." Emily's breath hitched in her chest, and she stumbled back, her heart pounding in her ears. The voice was not her own, but it felt so familiar, as though it had been inside her all along, waiting to awaken. The words continued, but they were not meant for her. They were for the town, the forgotten dreams of Everwell. The symbols on the walls flared to life, swirling and merging with the book's pages, and Emily could feel the air thickening, pressing in on her. The ground trembled beneath her, a subtle vibration that sent a shock of fear through her body. The room was alive, and it was reacting to her presence. Suddenly, the hum ceased, replaced by a loud, jarring crack that echoed through the chamber. The stone beneath her feet split open, revealing a hidden passage, one that had been sealed away for centuries. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and as the passage yawned wide, Emily felt an overwhelming urge to step into it. It was as though the town itself was calling to her, drawing her toward whatever lay beyond. Despite the fear clawing at her insides, she knew she had no choice. She had to follow the path laid before her. She could feel it in her bones. This was where the answers lay. The whispers from the book were not just echoes. They were the pulse of the town, of the dreams that had been forgotten for so long. And now they were waking. With one last glance at the book, its pages now still and silent, Emily stepped forward into the darkness, the passageway swallowing her whole. The ground beneath her trembled once more as she moved deeper, the walls closing in with each step, as though the earth itself was watching, waiting for her to uncover its secrets. The air grew colder as she moved deeper, and the light from the chamber faded behind her. The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic, as though the very structure of the earth was shifting around her. She could feel the weight of the town pressing down on her shoulders, the centuries of forgotten memories and dreams buried beneath her feet. As she rounded a corner, she stumbled upon something unexpected. A door. It was old, its wood warped and cracked with age, but it felt important, significant in a way she couldn't explain. The whispers from the book seemed to grow louder as she approached, urging her to open it. She hesitated for a moment, but something inside her told her she had no choice. Taking a deep breath, Emily reached for the handle and pulled the door open. The hinges creaked in protest, but it gave way with a soft groan, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. The air was thick with dust, and the floor was covered in old, decaying books and papers. It looked like a forgotten library, one that had been sealed away for centuries. But what caught Emily's attention was the large, ornate mirror that stood against the far wall. It was framed in dark wood, intricately carved with symbols she recognized from the book. As she stepped closer, she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The mirror seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, its surface rippling as though something was moving just beneath it. Emily reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the glass. For a moment, everything went still. The room, the whispers, the very air itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, the mirror began to change. The reflection that stared back at her was not her own. Emily stood frozen, her hand still pressed lightly against the cool surface of the mirror. The reflection that greeted her was not her own. It was a stranger's face, pale and unfamiliar, staring back at her with eyes that seemed far too knowing. The woman in the mirror had long, tangled hair and a sorrowful expression, as if burdened by a memory she could not escape. Emily blinked, certain that her heart had stopped for a moment. Was she seeing things? No. The woman in the mirror moved in sync with her, but with an eerie slowness, as though the reflection were a separate entity altogether. The room around her began to grow colder, the walls pressing in, as if the very air was thickening. She could feel her breath become shallow, her pulse quickening in her throat. The whispering from the book had stopped, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor and up into her bones. The reflection's eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, seemed to study her with an almost haunting intensity, their gaze heavy and full of a sorrow she couldn't understand. It was as though they were trying to tell her something vital. Suddenly, the woman's lips parted. At first, Emily couldn't hear the words, but then they came through, soft and breathy, like a dream barely remembered. "It's too late now," Emily recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled backward, her legs weak. but the mirror seemed to draw her in, the words reverberating in her mind. She knew she had to get away. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a mirror. It was a gateway, an anchor to something much older and much darker. The woman in the mirror spoke again, and this time her words were clearer, more urgent. "You're here because you've been chosen. The dreams cannot be silenced." The echo of those words filled the room, swirling around Emily, and she felt the oppressive weight of the mirror's gaze on her skin, as though it could see right through her. The air thickened with something unnameable: fear, sorrow, and an ancient, forgotten longing. The woman's reflection raised her hand, slowly, deliberately, and placed it against the glass, mirroring Emily's own trembling fingers. For a moment everything seemed to still, then the mirror rippled again, distorting the reflection. A sharp crack echoed in the room, and Emily stumbled back, falling hard onto the dusty floor. She scrambled to her feet, her hands trembling as she looked around, desperately searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to go. The door had vanished, no trace of it remained. She was trapped in this small room with the mirror, its surface now moving in strange, fluid motions, like water disturbed by an unseen current. The reflection in the mirror began to shift once more. The woman's sorrowful face was replaced by flashes of images, snippets of scenes from her own life that she hadn't thought about in years. She saw her childhood home, the garden where she used to play, her parents standing by the door, smiling. But then the images twisted, morphing into something darker. A figure appeared in the garden, cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing like fire. The figure reached for her, and the scene abruptly vanished, replaced by more disjointed fragments. Emily's breath quickened as she realized what was happening. These weren't just random memories, these were visions of things that hadn't happened yet. The mirror was showing her glimpses of the future, twisted and distorted, but undeniably real. The strange figure in the garden, was it the same one from her dreams? The one that had been watching her for weeks, ever since the first time the dreams began. As the images continued to flash before her eyes, Emily felt a sharp, agonizing pressure in her chest. She could hear the voice again, that soft whisper from the mirror. "They're coming for you, Emily. The dreams have woken." The words hit her like a blow, and she staggered to her feet, her hands reaching for the mirror, desperate to stop the visions, to stop the pull of whatever dark force had bound her to this place. She could feel it, the mirror was alive, drawing her in with an unseen force. She had to get out. She had to break free. But no matter how hard she tried, her hand wouldn't pull away from the glass. It was as if the mirror had taken hold of her, its cold surface sinking into her skin, holding her in place. Her vision began to blur, and the room around her dissolved, replaced by swirling darkness. The strange, glowing eyes of the figure in the garden loomed in the distance, growing larger and larger as she was pulled deeper into the mirror's depths. "You cannot escape," the voice said, now louder, more insistent. "You belong to the dreams now." With one final, desperate cry, Emily felt herself being swallowed by the darkness, the weight of forgotten dreams crashing down on her, pulling her under. When Emily awoke, the world around her felt wrong. Her limbs were heavy, her body drained, as if she'd been trapped in the mirror for far longer than the moments it had felt. She was no longer in the small room where the mirror had trapped her. Instead, she found herself in a forest, a dense, dark place where the trees loomed like towering figures, their branches reaching out like hands, blocking any hint of the sky above. The air was thick and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. A chill seeped into her bones, even though she couldn't see a single breath of wind stirring the leaves. She sat up slowly, her head spinning. The fog clung to the ground, wrapping around her legs as she tried to stand. Each step felt like a laborious effort, as though the forest itself were holding her back. The whispers had returned, filling the space around her with a faint hum, barely audible but impossible to ignore. Emily looked around, her eyes straining in the dim light. Nothing moved, not even a bird or insect. The silence felt suffocating. But then she saw them, figures emerging from the shadows, their movements slow, deliberate. Their faces were obscured by masks, strange and unsettling, as though each one was a fragment of a forgotten memory. Some were cracked, some were smooth, but all were hollow, empty eyes staring at her from behind their false fronts. The figures surrounded her, standing in perfect stillness, waiting. She could feel their gaze, but they said nothing. Emily's heart raced. She had seen these figures before in her dreams, always watching, always silent. They were the same ones that had followed her from the beginning, the same ones that had whispered to her from the depths of sleep, the same ones that had caused the weight of forgotten dreams to settle on her chest. She took a step back, but the figures remained motionless, unblinking. Their presence was oppressive, like an invisible force pressing down on her. She tried to move further, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to grow soft, like quicksand. Her breath caught in her throat. One of the figures began to move. It stepped forward slowly, its footfalls muffled by the thick layer of fog on the ground. The others followed suit, each movement slow and deliberate. They formed a circle around her, their faces still hidden behind their masks. Emily's mind raced, her thoughts swirling in confusion. Why was she here? What was the price they had spoken of? The figure that had approached her raised its hand, and Emily flinched, her body tense, waiting for something violent to happen. But instead, the figure pointed toward the sky, toward a faint glimmer of light far above the canopy of trees. It was a distant, pale light, like the glow of a dying star, flickering weakly in the oppressive darkness. "Do you see it?" A voice whispered from within her mind, but it wasn't a voice she could hear with her ears. It was a presence, a thought, a message that slithered into her consciousness. "The light is fading. The price of escape is always higher than you imagine." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she stared up at the light. She wanted to move toward it, to escape this place, but she knew deep down that the light was not an answer. It was a trap. She had been in this dream before. She had seen it, and she had always woken up just before it consumed her. "You are not ready," the voice continued, a faint whisper that echoed in her chest. "No one is. The dreams are older than you, they are part of you. The price is always paid in full." Her thoughts raced as the circle of figures closed in, their eyes unblinking behind their masks. She could feel their intent pressing down on her like a weight she could no longer lift. The dream was real, the mirror was real, and the cost of leaving it behind, of waking up, was something she could not bear to face. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gave way. She stumbled, falling into a deep, empty void that opened up without warning. The figures watched, silent and motionless, as she fell deeper into the dark, into the unknown. Her body felt weightless, as if she were floating, but the fear clawed at her chest. The air around her grew colder, and with it, the pressure mounted. The whispers in her mind became clearer, more distinct, like voices calling from the very edge of her sanity. She reached out, desperately searching for something to hold onto, but there was nothing. The dark stretched on endlessly, as if it would consume her whole. Her mind screamed for escape. "The price has already been paid." The voice whispered one last time. "You are already part of the dream." Her vision blurred, the darkness swallowing everything. The last thing she heard was a soft, distant laugh, a sound so familiar and so terrifying that it sent a shiver down her spine. The darkness around Emily was suffocating, a void that seemed to stretch on forever, swallowing every inch of her reality. She had no sense of time, no sense of place. The sensation of falling had ceased, replaced instead by a disorienting stillness. It was as if she were suspended in some space between wakefulness and sleep, no longer bound by the laws of nature, unable to grasp at anything solid. Her mind struggled to hold on to the fragments of memory that remained. But then, as though summoned by her desperation, the darkness began to shift. A soft light flickered in the distance, small at first, but growing brighter and clearer with each passing moment. Emily's heart fluttered in her chest. Could this be an answer, a way out? The light danced in front of her, twirling like a living thing, a beacon in the endless abyss. She reached toward it, her hands trembling. As her fingers touched its edge, she felt a sudden surge of cold, a biting, unbearable chill that threatened to pull her into the light completely. But as she tried to retreat, she was held fast. The light wasn't soft or comforting as she had first imagined. Instead, it felt sharp, like a blade scraping against her very soul. The sensation was so intense that it stole her breath, and her mind began to fragment under its pressure. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the space with a growing intensity. But these weren't the soft whispers of the masked figures. These were voices, real voices, familiar voices, calling her name. Emily. The voice was clear and unmistakable, as if it had risen from the depths of her own memories. She froze, her heart catching in her throat. It was her mother's voice, but it sounded distorted, as though it had been warped by time itself. Emily, you've forgotten. You've forgotten everything. The words echoed around her, wrapping themselves around her thoughts like tendrils, pulling her deeper into the web of memories that she had long tried to suppress. The light before her flickered again, growing brighter, more blinding. Her vision swam in and out of focus, and she could barely hold on to the sense of herself, her own identity slipping through her fingers like sand. Do you remember? The voice continued, its tone low and pleading. Do you remember what you gave up, what you let go? The light now enveloped her, and the cold intensified, gnawing at her very bones. She closed her eyes, desperate to shut out the sound, the light, the pressure. But when she opened them again, she was no longer in the void. She was standing in her childhood home. The walls around her were familiar, comforting, but they felt wrong somehow. The room was the same, yet different. The wallpaper was peeling, the floorboards creaked underfoot, and the smell of old wood filled the air. It was as if the house had aged, warped in ways that didn't match her memories. The light from the window outside was dim, casting long shadows across the floor, making the room seem darker than it should have been. Emily's breath hitched. She was back, but how? How could she be back here, in this place, in this time? Hadn't she already left it behind? Wasn't she supposed to be dreaming? Come. The voice urged again, pulling her toward the hallway. There's someone you need to see. Her feet moved before she could stop them, drawn by the force of the voice, the pull of something ancient and familiar. She walked down the hallway of her childhood home, passing rooms that felt both comforting and haunting. The sound of her footsteps was muffled, drowned out by the noise in her head. She could feel the eyes of something watching her, but there was no one there. When she reached the end of the hall, the door to her parents' bedroom stood ajar. The room beyond was darker than she remembered, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the door handle, but the voice urged her on. Open it, Emily. You've forgotten, but you must remember. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Inside, the room was empty, except for a mirror. It stood tall, its frame ornate, as if it had belonged to someone else. A strange, cold sensation washed over her as she approached it. There was something off about the reflection, something wrong. It wasn't her own reflection staring back at her, it was someone else. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass. The figure in the mirror was a woman, her mother, but not quite. The reflection was blurry, distorted, as though it were trapped in some space between two worlds. She's waiting. The voice whispered once more. She's waiting for you to remember. Before Emily could react, the reflection of her mother reached out from the mirror, her fingers brushing the glass. The sensation sent a shock of cold through Emily's veins. She stumbled back, but the figure in the mirror followed her, its hand pressing against the surface of the glass, urging her to come closer. The door slammed shut behind her, and just like that, Emily found herself back in the forest, the same eerie woods where the masked figures had gathered. The cold still clung to her, the whispers louder now, the figures circling her, their hollow eyes never blinking. The truth was closing in on her, suffocating her with each passing moment. Emily's pulse raced in her ears, the thundering of her heart drowning out the whispers, but not the pressure that built around her. She was back in the forest, and the masked figures were still watching, still waiting. She couldn't explain how she'd gotten here, or why the air felt so heavy, but there was a single thought consuming her mind: the mirror. Her mother's reflection, the cold touch that reached through it. It all felt too real. The figures moved silently through the trees, their eyes glowing faintly beneath their masks, and though they remained distant, their presence was suffocating. Emily wanted to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. Her feet refused to move, as though the earth beneath her had become one with her body, holding her still. The forest itself seemed to close in around her, the tall, skeletal trees bending closer, their branches outstretched like twisted hands. With a trembling breath, Emily remembered the words, "She's waiting for you to remember." The voice that had guided her here, the one that echoed through the veil of dreams and memories. It was familiar. Too familiar. She could feel it like a constant hum in the back of her mind. She turned her head toward the center of the gathering of figures, her gaze locked on the towering figure whose mask seemed to shimmer with the faintest glow. The figure stepped forward, its long, flowing robes brushing the leaves, and the world seemed to slow as it approached her. The air thickened, making each breath feel like a battle, but she couldn't look away from the masked figure, not now. Not after everything she'd learned. She could feel something stirring within her, an awareness, a deep knowledge she had forgotten. "Remember," the figure whispered in a voice that felt like a distant memory. The tone was neither cruel nor kind, but it was undeniably urgent. It was like hearing her mother's voice again, yet warped, stretched across time. "Do you remember now, or are you still running?" The words twisted something deep inside her. Emily's mind flashed back to the mirror, to the image of her mother's reflection. The cold, the chill, the hand reaching through her legs trembled, and with a force she didn't understand, she took a step toward the figure. Each movement was deliberate, but heavy, as if each step dragged her through thick fog. The closer she got to the figure, the more she felt as though she were walking through a dream that she could no longer wake from. The whispers that had surrounded her for what felt like lifetimes faded, leaving only silence. "You cannot escape, Emily. You've always known this." The figure spoke again, its voice now clear, like it was calling from within her own thoughts. "This world is your inheritance. What you have forgotten, what you tried to hide, it was never yours to hide." The air around her chilled further as the figure tilted its head, the mask of smooth, featureless white like a mirror, reflecting nothing but her own face, her own confusion. She wanted to scream, to run, but the words of the figure kept her rooted in place. "You gave up what could have been, and now you must take it back." The memories flooded in, one after another, each sharper, more vivid than the last. Her childhood home. The mirror, the faces of the figures she had seen, distorted in her dreams, and then, the moment that had caused it all, the moment she had let go. Her mother's death, the promise she had broken to herself. She had turned away, chosen to forget, to let the grief slip into oblivion. But now the weight of it was suffocating her, dragging her into the ground beneath her feet. Her knees buckled, but she did not fall. Instead, she felt herself being drawn upward, as though the figure was pulling her with invisible strings, lifting her off the ground and into the air, toward the moonless sky. The mask in front of her began to shimmer, its white surface reflecting the stars above, stars that seemed impossibly close, flickering like tiny, burning eyes. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You already know, Emily," the figure replied. "This is the price of remembering, and now you will never forget again." And then, like an avalanche, the memories came crashing down. The house, the door that had always been locked, her mother's voice echoing from the other side. She had known the truth all along, buried deep within the recesses of her mind. She had always known that she had a part to play in this, the part of the one who could remember, the one who would awaken the past. Her heart pounded as she realized the weight of her choice. There was no escaping it now. The truth had to be embraced, no matter how heavy it became. The forest around her began to dissolve, fading like smoke. The world, her reality, it all fractured. The whispering figures, the distant masks, they were no longer there. Only the cold remained, biting at her skin, and the realization that she was not the same. Emily stood alone in a place that defied all logic, a realm where nothing felt solid or real. The ground beneath her seemed to shift like liquid, ebbing and flowing with an unsettling rhythm. A pale mist curled around her legs, swirling upward in tendrils that seemed to reach for something just beyond her sight. Her senses were overwhelmed by the ethereal quiet, but in that silence, she could feel the weight of something immense, a presence, unseen, yet unmistakably close. Her heart beat faster as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Was this a dream? A continuation of the strange, persistent vision that had haunted her for days, weeks even? The air tasted faintly of salt, and the distant echoes of waves crashing onto unseen shores filled her ears, though she could see no ocean, no shore. Only an endless horizon that stretched before her, as if she were floating in the void between worlds. The sky above was a strange color, an unsettling blend of deep purple and black, like the remnants of a fading sunset. Stars flickered across the vast expanse, though they seemed to pulse erratically, as if not quite willing to stay fixed in place. A feeling of unease settled into her chest. She had been here before, or at least, this place felt too familiar, too much like a dream that had come to life. A voice, distant yet crystal clear, whispered her name from the depths of the mist. Emily. The sound sent a cold shiver down her spine, and her instincts screamed at her to run, but her body refused to move. She was trapped, caught in the web of this twisted reality. The voice called again, more insistent this time. Emily, you cannot escape. The words seemed to vibrate in her bones, as though they were not merely heard, but felt in the deepest recesses of her mind. The mist thickened, and the fog around her shifted, forming shapes, shadows that began to emerge from the haze. One by one, the figures materialized, just as she had seen them in her dreams. The same faceless beings, their bodies cloaked in long, flowing robes. Their masks gleamed with an unnatural light, reflecting her image, distorted and fractured. They moved in silence, their steps light, like the breeze moving through trees. As they approached, Emily's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the emptiness around her. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words felt foreign on her tongue, as if she no longer knew how to speak. The figures did not answer. They simply surrounded her, their presence suffocating, their eyes hidden behind their blank, reflective masks. Then, one of the figures stepped forward, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. Its mask shimmered like the surface of a still pond, and within it, she saw her own reflection, not just her face, but her entire life, fractured into 1,000 pieces. The moments she had tried to forget, the ones she had buried deep within her mind, were laid bare before her. The pain, the guilt, the mistakes, all of it was reflected back at her, each image haunting and familiar. A low, guttural voice rumbled from the figure's direction, a voice that felt both ancient and timeless. "The truth you've been running from has always been here, Emily. It has always waited for you." The words sent a shock through her system, but it was not fear she felt now. It was something deeper, something more terrifying, recognition. She knew this was no dream. This was real as the memories she had tried to forget. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you showing me this?" The figure tilted its head, the mask reflecting her expression in perfect symmetry. "Because the time has come," it replied, its voice echoing around her. "You cannot escape the truth forever. You have reached the end of your forgetting. The veil has lifted, and now you will remember all that you have lost. Emily's mind raced as the weight of the figure's words settled over her. The pieces were falling into place, one by one, though she did not yet understand the full picture. Her mother's reflection, the house, the mirror, the figures, the forest, all of it was connected. It had always been connected. The truth of her past was now inescapable, pulling her back towards something she could not deny. A sudden shift in the air made her snap her head toward the horizon. The mist began to swirl faster, the shapes of the figures twisting and warping into something unrecognizable. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, as though the world itself was preparing to collapse. "You are not the only one, Emily," the figure said softly, its voice almost comforting. "There are others like you, others who have forgotten, others who are waiting for the truth to come. You are part of something larger than yourself. You are the key." Emily's mind reeled, but the figure's words clung to her like a shadow. She was not alone in this, but what did that mean? What had she forgotten, and why was it so important for her to remember now? Before she could process any of it, the figures began to retreat, slowly vanishing into the swirling fog. The rumbling of the ground continued, a deep, unsettling hum that vibrated through her very soul. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything fell silent. The mist was gone, and Emily found herself standing alone in a vast, empty space. She could still hear the faint echoes of the figure's departure, their whispers now nothing more than a distant memory. But one thing was clear: she had crossed a threshold. There was no going back. The silence around Emily was suffocating, thicker than the mist that had once surrounded her. It pressed against her skin, into her very being, as if trying to pull her into the earth beneath her feet. She stood in the emptiness, staring into the void where the figures had disappeared, but the weight of their presence lingered, a palpable thing that clung to the air. Her breath was shallow as she tried to steady herself. What had she learned? What had they shown her? The truth, she now realized, was not a single revelation, but a slow, insidious unraveling of everything she thought she knew. The figures, those faceless beings who had once terrified her, were not just a part of her dream. They were a part of her life, an integral piece she could no longer deny. The thought settled in her mind like a seed, and it began to grow. The more she focused on the words they had spoken, the more pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, though the image they formed was still hazy. She had been running, but from what? And why had she forgotten it all? Her memories were fragmented, slipping away like sand through her fingers. But there was something else, something far deeper than the figures or her lost memories. The ground beneath her trembled again, and she felt the pull of something distant calling her. A presence, not just the faceless beings, but something older, something unseen, buried beneath the surface of the world she thought she knew. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the relentless hum in her ears, but it persisted, vibrating through her bones. It was a low sound, like a distant rumble of thunder, but it was too constant, too insistent. Her thoughts began to fray as the hum grew louder, louder still, until it was all she could hear. The air around her thickened again, but this time it was not the mist. It was the weight of 1,000 forgotten whispers, pressing in from all sides. She opened her eyes to find the horizon had shifted. What had once been an endless void was now filled with jagged, broken shapes, ruins, perhaps, or remnants of something long destroyed. The world around her had fractured, just as her memories had, and she could feel herself falling into the cracks. Her heart raced as she turned in place, but there was nowhere to run. The landscape was shifting, becoming less real with each passing moment, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a faint smell of wet earth, and something else, something rotting. A voice broke through the suffocating silence, its tone low and soothing, yet filled with an unsettling finality. "You have returned, Emily." She froze, the voice she knew it, but how? It was not like the figures, distant and faceless. This voice was personal, familiar. and it carried with it a sense of knowing that made her blood run cold. It spoke as though it had always known her, had always been there, waiting. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking as she took a step backward. But there was no reply, only the sound of her breath, rapid and uneven, filling the space between the words. She could feel the weight of the unseen presence drawing nearer, like a shadow creeping closer, its very nature elusive, a blur on the edge of her perception. Then the ground shifted beneath her feet, the jagged ruins warping and twisting as if they were alive, breathing in sync with her racing heartbeat. Her surroundings became more distorted, a tangled mess of shapes and sounds, none of it making sense, yet all of it feeling deeply familiar. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the broken landscape, and Emily gasped, clutching her arms as the temperature dropped. The cold seeped into her bones, an unnatural chill that made her skin crawl. The wind carried with it faint echoes of voices, too distant to understand, but the tone was unmistakable. It was filled with sorrow, regret, and the faintest hint of warning. "Why now?" she whispered, her voice breaking as she sank to her knees. She could feel the weight of it all pressing against her chest, a heaviness she couldn't escape. Her memories, the figures, the dreams, all of it was coming to a head, and she couldn't stop it. She didn't know how much longer she could endure this nightmare. "Because you are ready," the voice answered, so close now it seemed to surround her, filling every space. "You have seen the truth, Emily, the truth that has been buried beneath the surface, beneath your very mind. You are a part of it, and now you must face the consequences of remembering." The world shifted again, this time violently, as if the very fabric of her reality was being torn apart. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the vast, empty space. Her thoughts whirled, a storm of confusion and fear, but in that moment, a single thought cut through the chaos like a blade. She had always been here. The truth she had sought was not something outside of her. It was something she had forgotten, something buried deep within her own soul. The very core of her existence had been linked to this place, to this nightmare, and the more she tried to escape, the more she was drawn back to it. It was never about running away. It was about remembering. Emily's mind reeled as she staggered to her feet. The world around her had shattered once again, the ground beneath her crumbling, as if it were nothing more than dust and fragments of old memories. The once familiar ruins were now a swirling, ever-changing landscape, constantly shifting like a puzzle that refused to settle. She couldn't tell if she was falling, or if the world itself was pulling away from her, slipping through her fingers, leaving her grasping for meaning in the chaos. The whispering voices were louder now, their words mingling with the eerie hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air. They were not words she could understand, not yet, but they carried a weight, a familiarity, that gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. Her pulse quickened as she realized that these whispers weren't random. They were patterns, repeating phrases that seemed to flicker just out of reach. Suddenly, the world around her stilled. The wind died down, the voices faded, and the rumbling of the earth came to a halt. Emily stood alone in a silence so deep it felt suffocating. Her breath echoed in her ears as she looked around, desperate for any sign of what was happening. It was then that she saw it, the smallest of shifts. The air itself shimmered before her eyes, and the outlines of the ruined landscape began to resolve into something more tangible, something more recognizable. The ground beneath her feet was no longer jagged and broken. Instead, it was smooth like worn stone, stretching out into a vast, empty space. A faint glow began to pulse in the distance, a soft, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. It called to her, beckoning her to follow. The deeper she walked, the more the world around her seemed to solidify, forming into something she could comprehend. And yet it was still not quite real. There was a sense of unreality, like walking through a half-forgotten dream, where the edges of everything were blurred, indistinct. But something in her gut told her she was close, that the answers she had been searching for were within reach. The glow grew brighter, revealing a large stone structure ahead, rising up from the smooth stone floor. It was ancient, covered in moss and creeping ivy, its surface worn by the passage of time. Yet, despite its age, it felt somehow familiar. She had seen it before, somewhere, in her forgotten memories. She had stood in front of it, had felt its presence weigh down on her. Approaching the structure, Emily's breath caught in her throat. Inscribed into the stone was a symbol, a circle with an intricate pattern inside, like a maze. It was the same symbol she had seen in her dreams, the same one that had haunted her thoughts since the moment she first began to remember. It was no longer just a random image. It was a key, a thread that tied together everything she had experienced. And now, standing before it, she could feel its significance deep within her bones. The symbol seemed to pulse with energy, and as she reached out to touch it, the air around her shimmered once more. The whispers returned, louder now, more insistent, as if they were urging her to make a choice. Emily's fingers hovered just above the stone, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what would happen if she touched it, whether the truth she sought would finally be revealed, or if she would be swallowed by the endless void of forgotten memories that had plagued her. Without thinking, she pressed her hand against the symbol. A surge of energy shot through her, and the ground beneath her trembled. The stone beneath her palm felt warm, alive, as though it were reacting to her touch. The world around her shifted again, but this time it was not the violent, disorienting movement she had come to expect. Instead, the ruins, the landscape, the very air itself began to rearrange, forming into something more ordered, more defined. Images flashed in her mind, glimpses of faces she had forgotten, of places she had never seen but somehow knew. They were all connected, all part of the same story, a story she had once lived and had long since lost the memory of. As each image passed, she understood more, each one a piece of the puzzle that had eluded her for so long. And then it came, the moment of realization. The dreams were not just dreams. They were fragments of a life she had lived, long ago, in another time, in another world. She had been here before, had walked this path, and had made choices that had led her to forget. The symbol, the faces, the voices, it was all part of the cycle. She had come back, and now she was remembering the truth that had been buried beneath layers of time and fear. But what was that truth? The pulse of the symbol quickened, its glow intensifying, and the whispers grew louder, clearer. A single phrase echoed in her mind, repeated over and over again, like a mantra. Remember what was lost. The ground beneath her feet cracked, and a door appeared in the stone wall, just ahead. It stood wide open, as though inviting her inside, into the heart of the mystery she had spent so long trying to uncover. She had no choice now. She stepped forward. The door creaked open with a low groan, the sound reverberating through the vast emptiness around Emily. Her heartbeat quickened as she stepped forward, crossing the threshold into a space that felt both alien and intimately familiar. The air inside was thick with the scent of old earth and something more, something faintly metallic, like the remnants of forgotten memories. The walls, if they could be called that, were carved from stone so smooth it seemed to shimmer with a faint, eerie glow. Each step she took echoed, stretching into the silence, but it felt like the very walls were listening to her every movement. The space before her was large, vast, almost cavernous, yet there was no ceiling. Instead, a dark expanse stretched above her, so vast it felt like an infinite sky, swirling with clouds that shifted in strange, unnatural patterns. The air shimmered with an otherworldly energy, and the ground beneath her was covered with a soft, spongy moss that absorbed the sound of her footsteps. Every detail of this place, the quiet hum of the air, the shifting clouds above, the soft ground beneath her, felt like a dream woven from the fragments of her past. In the center of the room, a pedestal stood, illuminated by a single beam of pale light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The pedestal was simple, made of the same stone as the walls, but upon it rested something far more significant. It was a book, bound in black leather, its edges worn as though it had been touched by countless hands. The book seemed to pulse with a life of its own, calling to Emily, urging her to come closer. As she approached, the whispers returned, louder now, swirling around her in a dizzying crescendo. But the voices were different this time. They were no longer just random murmurs. They were clear, coherent, as though they had found their voice after so many years of silence. They spoke in unison, their words carrying an urgency that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "Open it," they whispered, their voices both soothing and unsettling, "and remember what was lost." Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the book. She could feel its weight, its significance, pressing down on her as if it were a link to something far greater than herself. A choice hung in the air, whether to open the book and confront the truth of her past, or to turn away, to leave this place and continue her life without knowing the full extent of what had happened. She knew that once she opened it, there would be no turning back. The answers she had sought for so long would finally be within her grasp, but so too would the weight of all that she had forgotten. It felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that the only way forward was to fall. With a deep breath, she placed her hands on the cover, feeling its texture beneath her fingertips. There was no hesitation now. This was what she had come for. Slowly, she opened the book. The pages inside were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As she turned the first page, the air around her seemed to thicken, the whispers fading into silence as the words on the page began to form in her mind. The book was not just a recounting of events. It was a record of everything she had forgotten, a chronicle of lives she had lived and lost, and a map of the path that had led her here. As Emily read, images flooded her mind, faces of people she had never met, places she had never been, yet all of them felt deeply familiar. These were the fragments of a life she had lived long before this moment, long before her name had been Emily, long before any of this had begun. And then, in the quietest of moments, she understood. The truth she had been seeking was not one that could be easily explained, nor was it a single revelation. It was a story, a pattern that had played out over and over again, each cycle a little different, but always leading her to this point. The dreams, the shared dreams, the visions, the symbols had been a reflection of something older, something beyond her comprehension. And now she was standing in the very heart of it, holding the key to unlocking it all. But even as the truth began to unfold, a lingering doubt gnawed at her. What would happen once the last page was turned? Would she be able to accept the truth, or would it swallow her whole, just as it had done to everyone else before her? The ground trembled beneath her feet, and for a moment the world around her seemed to shift again. The dark expanse above began to swirl faster, the clouds twisting in erratic patterns. The whispers returned, now frantic, as though the book itself was reacting to her discovery. Close it, the voices begged, "Do not open the final page." But Emily's eyes were drawn inexorably to the last page, the final truth that awaited her. Emily's fingers trembled as they hovered over the final page of the book. The whispers had become frantic, their voices now a chaotic blur, all speaking over one another, urging her to stop, to leave, to never read the last words. But despite the warnings, despite the chill creeping down her spine, she couldn't tear herself away. This was the moment she had been building toward, the moment where everything would finally make sense, or perhaps where everything would unravel completely. She hesitated, her breath shallow, as she glanced up at the swirling, infinite sky above. The shifting clouds had grown darker, their movement erratic, as if reacting to the tension in the air. The ground beneath her feet had begun to pulse with a strange energy, an invisible rhythm that seemed to resonate with the beating of her own heart. The very fabric of the world around her was trembling, as if everything depended on her decision. With a deep, steadying breath, Emily turned the page. The words were written in a language that was familiar, yet foreign, like echoes of forgotten memories. As she read, they formed in her mind, the meaning becoming clear despite the oddness of the symbols. She recognized the patterns, the shapes, and the fragments of truth. It wasn't just a story, it was a map, a guide, an account of all that had happened, all that was happening, and all that would happen. The dreams, the shared visions, the recurring faces, it was all connected. The final words on the page struck her with the force of a physical blow. The weight of forgotten dreams cannot be borne by one alone. The phrase lingered in the air, a heavy echo that filled the room with a suffocating sense of finality. As the words settled in her mind, the world around her seemed to shift, the walls closing in, the air thickening. The ground trembled beneath her, and for the briefest of moments, Emily wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Was it too late to turn back? Could she close the book, escape the grasp of this fate, or was it already too late to escape the consequences? And then, in the silence that followed, the shadows around her seemed to deepen. They stretched, twisting and pulling, as though something long forgotten was beginning to stir. The quiet hum of the space intensified, and for the first time, Emily felt the presence of someone else in the room. She wasn't alone. Slowly, she turned her head, her heart pounding in her chest, and there, in the distance, she saw them. Figures, shrouded in darkness, standing at the edge of the light. Their features were obscured, but their silhouettes were unmistakable. They were watching her, silent, waiting. Their presence was overwhelming, oppressive, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She couldn't tell if they were real or just another manifestation of the dream, another layer of the illusion that had consumed her life. The air grew colder, and a deep, bone-chilling dread crept into her bones. This was it, the moment she had feared. The dream had always been leading her here, to this final revelation, and now there was no escape. The whispers grew louder again, this time with a single, unified voice. It spoke softly, but the words seemed to reverberate through her very soul. "You were never meant to remember." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth and regret. Emily's eyes darted back to the book in her hands, but it was no longer just a book. It had transformed, its pages now glowing with an ethereal light that cast strange shadows across the room. The book was no longer a passive object. It had become a conduit, a bridge between her and whatever lay beyond the veil. With trembling hands, Emily closed the book. The moment she did, the figures at the edge of the light began to move. Slowly at first, their movements almost imperceptible, but as they came closer, she could feel the air shift. The shadows enveloped them, and as they stepped into the light, their faces became clear, each one a reflection of a person she knew, someone from her past, someone she had forgotten. They were her, every one of them. Each figure was a part of her, a memory she had lost, a piece of herself that had been buried deep within the labyrinth of her own mind. The weight of forgotten dreams was not just a metaphor, it was a living truth, and each person in front of her was a reminder of the pieces of her own self that had been lost to time. For a moment, Emily stood frozen, her mind racing. The truth was clear now, more than she had ever wanted to understand. The dreams were not just dreams. They were fragments of herself, pieces of a reality that had been erased, reshaped, and hidden away. And now, standing in the heart of this place, she realized that the book had not only unlocked the truth, it had allowed her to remember everything she had forgotten. But the question remained, could she accept it? The room began to darken, the air growing thicker, as though the very space was folding in on itself. The figures were moving closer, their hands reaching out toward her, each one an extension of herself, urging her to embrace the truth, to accept the weight of the forgotten dreams. The figures, shadows of her past selves, moved closer with deliberate slowness, their hands outstretched, beckoning her toward them. Each step they took felt like a heartbeat in her chest, a pulse that reverberated through her, deeper and deeper, until the very air around her began to hum with an unsettling energy. Their faces, though familiar, were distorted. as if they had been reshaped by time itself, fragments of memories sewn together into something unrecognizable. Emily's mind raced. Was this really happening? Or had she crossed over into some other place, some forgotten corner of her own mind, where nothing could be trusted? She had always been able to deny the dreams, to dismiss them as meaningless fragments of sleep. But now, with the book in her hands and the figures surrounding her, the lines between dream and reality were blurring in a way she couldn't ignore. She could feel them, each of her past selves, their emotions swirling through her like a storm. The sorrow of a lost childhood, the fear of a forgotten future, the anger of betrayals that had never been spoken aloud. Every feeling, every piece of herself she had buried, was flooding back. She wanted to run, to escape from the suffocating weight of it all. But the figures were closing in, their presence growing stronger with each passing moment. "Stop," she whispered, her voice barely a breath in the thick air. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Because they were her. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing in as the figures moved closer, their hands brushing against her skin, as though they were trying to pull her into their world, to make her part of the dream they had all been trapped in. Their touch was cold, like the chill of a forgotten winter, and Emily felt a creeping numbness spread from the points of contact, slowly stealing the warmth from her limbs. The weight of the forgotten dreams was too much to bear. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward, its face shifting, becoming clearer, becoming her face, but older, more worn, as if the years had carved themselves into the lines of her expression. The figure's eyes were filled with something she couldn't name, a sadness that seemed to extend beyond her own understanding. It was a reflection of everything she had been and everything she had tried to forget. "You were never meant to remember," the figure said, its voice hollow, an echo of her own. Emily's breath hitched. The words echoed in her mind like a mantra, a truth she had always known, but never fully understood. She had fought so hard to forget, to push away the memories that had haunted her for as long as she could remember. But now, standing before her, was the undeniable truth. She had never been meant to remember. And yet, here she was, standing at the crossroads of her past and future, with the weight of those forgotten dreams pressing down on her like an anchor. The figure reached out, its hand hovering just inches from her own. "To remember," it whispered, "is to pay the price." Emily could feel the heaviness of those words sinking into her chest, pushing against the walls of her heart, trying to break through. She closed her eyes, desperate to shut out the rising tide of memories that threatened to drown her. She didn't want this. She didn't want to face what lay beneath the surface of the dreams. But deep down, she knew that the price of remembering wasn't something she could avoid. It was the price of the truth, the cost of seeing beyond the veil. The shadows around her seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, the room growing colder with each passing moment. The book in her hands had grown heavier, its pages now glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. It was no longer just a book. It had become the key to everything, the key to unlocking the past, the key to unlocking herself. And with that realization, Emily knew she had no choice. She had to accept it. She had to remember. With a trembling hand, she opened the book once more. The pages turned of their own accord, as though they were being guided by an unseen force. The whispers began again, growing louder, more insistent. The voices that had once been fragmented now spoke in unison, their words clear and unmistakable. "The truth lies in the past, and the past is yours to claim." The world around Emily began to shift, the edges of reality warping and distorting. The figures that surrounded her were fading, their forms dissolving into the darkness, their presence replaced by the sights, sounds, and emotions of another time, another place. She was no longer standing in the room, no longer surrounded by shadows. Instead, she was back in the town, back in the place where it all began. The air was thick with the scent of rain, the sky overhead a dark, oppressive gray. The streets were empty, save for the distant echo of footsteps. Emily's heart raced in her chest as she walked, the feeling of déjà vu washing over her like a cold wave. She knew this place, she had been here before, and then she saw it, the door, the same door from her dreams. The door that had always been just out of reach, the one that had always been waiting for her, the one that she had feared, the one she had forgotten, but now it was open. The darkness beyond it beckoned her. Emily stepped forward. The door loomed before Emily, dark and impenetrable, its edges sharp like the silhouette of a memory she had tried to erase. She could feel the pull of it, the deep, unrelenting pull of something ancient and familiar, as though this was the moment everything she had forgotten was meant to be revealed. The silence around her was suffocating, thick with the weight of unspoken truths, and for a brief moment she hesitated. The fear that had held her captive for so long whispered at the back of her mind, "Don't go through. Don't remember." But the book in her hand, now pulsating with an unnatural warmth, seemed to urge her forward, as if it too was waiting for this very moment. She knew that to step away would be to remain lost in a labyrinth of forgotten dreams, and though the cost of remembering was more than she could comprehend, it was too late to turn back now. She reached for the door, her hand trembling as she grasped the cold, rusted handle. The air around her grew heavier, thick with anticipation. The darkness beyond the threshold was not empty, not void. It was alive, swirling with shapes and memories that she could not fully see, but felt in the very marrow of her bones. With a deep breath, Emily pushed the door open. The sound it made, a low creak of rusted hinges, was a stark contrast to the stillness that had gripped the world around her. As the door swung wide, the temperature around her dropped, and a gust of wind swept through the opening, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. She stepped through. The world on the other side was nothing like the town she had just left. It was a place between places, a world that seemed to exist on the edge of reality, like a forgotten dream that no one had ever truly woken from. The ground beneath her feet was soft, as though the earth itself was made of some half-formed substance, shifting and unstable with every step. The sky above her was an endless void, no stars, no moon, just an oppressive darkness that stretched on forever. The air was thick with whispers, soft murmurs that seemed to come from all directions, but when she turned to listen, there was nothing there. Emily felt the weight of those voices pressing against her, as though they were not just whispers but the very echoes of her own thoughts, her own fears and regrets. She took another step, and then another, each movement bringing her deeper into this strange, liminal space. Her breath caught in her throat as she noticed something in the distance, a figure standing motionless in the void. It was a silhouette, but it felt wrong, as though it was not a person at all, but a shape pulled from the dark corners of her mind. The longer she stared, the more it seemed to shift, its form constantly changing, as if it couldn't decide what it was. It was watching her. Emily's pulse quickened, her instinct screaming at her to turn and run, but something within her, a force stronger than fear, kept her rooted to the spot. She had come this far. She had walked through the door. She couldn't turn back now. The figure moved. Not quickly, but with a fluid grace that made it seem as though it was always in motion, even when still. It glided toward her, the sound of its steps muffled by the shifting ground beneath her feet. The closer it got, the more its shape solidified, and Emily's breath hitched as she realized who, or what, it was. It was her, or at least a version of her. The figure's face was obscured by shadows, but Emily could see her own eyes staring back at her. Cold, empty, lost. This reflection was not the person she remembered, not the girl who had once dreamed with hope in her heart. No, this was someone else, someone who had been shaped by the very dreams she had tried to forget. "Do you remember now?" the figure asked, its voice a low murmur, indistinct, but unmistakably hers. Emily's heart raced, her throat tight. She wanted to speak, to ask the question that had been gnawing at her for so long. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself drawn into the figure's gaze, as if the eyes of this shadow self were pulling her deeper into something she wasn't sure she could escape. The figure stepped forward, its presence filling the air, its shadow stretching over Emily like a dark cloud. "The truth is never easy to accept," it whispered, "but it is yours, all of it, the dreams, the memories, the weight you've carried for so long." Suddenly, Emily understood. The dreams weren't just dreams. They were pieces of herself, fragments of a life she had abandoned, erased, forgotten. And the price of remembering, of walking through this door, was to face the person she had become, to confront the parts of herself she had buried so deep. She had almost convinced herself they were nothing but illusions. But the figure didn't stop there. It reached out, its hand cold and unfeeling, and gently pressed it against Emily's chest. The contact was like a shock, a sudden rush of memories, emotions, and visions that flooded her mind all at once. The past, the truth, the weight of forgotten dreams. In that moment, Emily saw everything: the town, the door, the dreams, the echoes of her own life, playing out in ways she had never fully understood. The missing pieces, the things she had tried so desperately to forget. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the vision faded. Emily stood there, in the void, alone once more, but something had shifted. The weight of the forgotten dreams had been lifted. She understood now. The door had never been a passage to another world. It was a passage to herself, to the pieces of her that she had left behind, the fragments she had to face. The figure was gone, the whispers faded, and yet, Emily knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of the truth she had to embrace. Emily stood in the silence, feeling as though the very air around her was waiting. The weight of everything she had seen, everything she had remembered, seemed to press down on her shoulders, yet there was no physical sensation, only the deep, unrelenting pull of the truth. Her breath was steady now, though each exhale felt heavier than the last. The world around her still shifted and blurred, but in this space, this place between places, time felt irrelevant. It was as if she had been suspended in a dream, yet not entirely asleep. The ground beneath her feet no longer felt like it was shifting. It had stabilized, as though the reality she was standing on had finally chosen to hold its form, if only for a fleeting moment. A cold wind, soft yet persistent, whispered through the empty void, but it carried no scent. There was no warmth here, no daylight to mark the passage of time, only the heavy presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for her to come back. She didn't need to look back to know the door was gone. The path she had walked down had vanished, leaving only the barest traces of the reality she had left behind. There was nothing to hold on to now but the memory of what she had seen, the figure that had been her reflection, and the truth she had uncovered. A truth that seemed impossible, yet undeniable. The dream was not a separate entity, not a force apart from her own existence. It had never been. She had not been dragged into a dream world. She had always been in it, a part of it, like the others. The people in the town, the recurring visions, the memories that had felt so familiar, so wrong, had all been tied to her in ways she could never have imagined. She was not an observer in her own life. She was the architect. The dream had always been hers to shape, to forget, to bury. And now, it seemed she was the one who had to face the consequences of her own creation. "You think you can outrun yourself." The voice came again, low and soft, but it no longer sounded like the figure she had seen before. It was something else now, deeper, darker, more resonant, a presence that spoke not just to her ears, but to her very soul. The truth gripped her chest. She had tried so hard to run, to forget the town, the people, and most of all, the dream. The dream that had always followed her, no matter how far she went. But the more she ran, the more the pieces of her past had caught up with her, drawing her back to this moment. She had been too afraid to confront it, too afraid to see what was behind the veil of the dream she had pushed away for so long. But now there was no turning back. The final piece of the puzzle was before her, and the realization was both liberating and terrifying. She wasn't trapped in the dream. The dream had been trapped in her, waiting for her to wake up and remember it all. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and she swayed, momentarily unsteady. Something deep within her shifted, as if she were being drawn into the very fabric of the world around her. The atmosphere grew denser, as though the space itself were pressing in on her. And then, from the darkness, a figure began to materialize, not the reflection she had seen before, but something more familiar. Her mother. The figure stood tall, her outline soft in the murky light, and though her features were indistinct, Emily knew her. She knew that face, those eyes, that voice. You remember now, don't you? Her voice was gentle, yet it carried a weight of sorrow that Emily couldn't shake. You've always known. You were always the one who dreamed us into being, and you were the one who chose to forget us. But we never forgot you, not once. Emily's heart ached as the memories came flooding back. She had blocked them out, pushed them so far into the recesses of her mind that she had almost convinced herself they had never existed. But here, in the midst of this dream, like void, everything felt so painfully real. The mother who had loved her, the town that had shaped her, the dreams that had been both a comfort and a prison. She could feel the years of forgotten moments crashing into her now. But why? Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Why did I forget? The figure of her mother stepped closer, and as she did, the atmosphere seemed to shift once more. The air grew colder, heavier, and Emily could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest. Because you were afraid, her mother replied softly, her voice full of love and understanding. Afraid of the power you held, afraid of what you might unleash if you remembered. But now it is time. You cannot run from the truth any longer. It has always been within you. You are the dreamer. Emily, you always have been. With those words, Emily felt something deep within her stir. The dream, the town, the people. They had all been part of her. A creation, a reflection, a mirror of her own fears, desires, and longings. But now that she understood, now that she remembered, she realized that the power was hers to control. She could shape the dream again, but this time, with the knowledge of what it truly was. The past, the present, and the future. They were all intertwined in this dream, like existence, and she was the one who held the threads. But that power came with a cost. The figure of her mother began to fade, her voice trailing off into the nothingness. The truth is yours to wield. But remember, Emily, what you create in your dreams can never truly be forgotten. And with that, the world around her began to dissolve, like sand slipping through her fingers. The silence returned, and Emily stood alone once more, no longer lost in the confusion of forgotten memories. She had faced the truth, and now she was free to choose, to shape her own reality. But there were still questions left unanswered. The dreams were not over. They would never be over. Emily stood at the edge of the darkness, her mind racing as the weight of the truth settled around her. The world around her was no longer the empty void it had once been. It was now a shifting, malleable landscape, and she was its creator. The power she had always possessed, the ability to shape and reshape her reality, now rested fully in her hands. But with that power came an undeniable responsibility. She could no longer deny the fact that her dreams had always been tied to the town, the people, and the very fabric of her life. As the shadows flickered and faded, replaced by a soft, ethereal light, she realized the decision before her. She could end it all, erase the dream entirely, and return to the life she had before, a life without the haunting weight of forgotten memories. Or she could embrace the dream, let it unfold as it had always been meant to, and face whatever consequences might come. But there was one truth that stood above all others. Nothing could be forgotten now. The town, the people, the faces of the strangers she had known, and the memories she had suppressed for so long. They were all her creation. And in this moment, Emily realized that they had never been fully separate from her. They were a part of her, as much as she was a part of them. The dream, this eternal, shifting place, was a mirror of herself, of her deepest desires, fears, and regrets. The wind, ever present and constant, began to stir again, carrying with it a soft, familiar scent like the smell of old wood and rain-soaked earth. It reminded her of home, of a place she had long since abandoned in her quest to forget. The light that bathed the world was warm now, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the night. In that moment, the choice became clear. She didn't have to choose between one reality or another. She could create something new, something that was hers, not dictated by fear or the echoes of forgotten dreams. The town could exist, but not as it had been. The people could live, but not as they once had. Emily had the power to rebuild, to take the fragments of her past and forge a new path forward. And yet, she knew there was one final piece to this puzzle. One last mystery she had to confront: the purpose of the dream. The shadowy figures, the haunting whispers, they had always been with her, but why? What had they been trying to tell her all this time? The figure of her mother appeared once again, standing in the soft light, her face as gentle and loving as Emily remembered it. "You've learned much, my dear." Her voice was a whisper, like the wind through the trees. "But remember, this is your creation. What you do now will shape everything. The dream is not just a reflection of you, but of all that you have forgotten, and all that you hope to remember." Emily felt her chest tighten as the full weight of those words settled in. The dream was not just a place, not just a world of fleeting images and memories. It was the embodiment of all that she had repressed: the love, the pain, the joy, and the sorrow she had long buried. It was her, all of her, stretched out across time, space, and reality. But now she understood. She wasn't trapped in the dream. The dream had never been a prison. It had been a mirror, reflecting back at her everything she needed to confront. The shadowy figures, the voices in the darkness, they had always been a part of her. They had never abandoned her. They had only been waiting for her to remember. The light around her flickered and shifted, transforming once again into a world she had never seen before. It was no longer the dream she had run from. It was something new, something born of her understanding, her acceptance. The town was still there, but it was no longer lost in the fog of her past. The people, the faces, the places, they had become a part of her again, not as echoes of something forgotten, but as living, breathing fragments of her own soul. Emily stepped forward, her feet firm on the ground. The air around her felt different now, less oppressive, more alive. The weight that had clung to her for so long, the fear of the unknown, the terror of the past, it was all gone. She had faced it. She had made the choice to confront the dream, to embrace it, to shape it. And now, she was free. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. There was no longer any need to run, to escape. The dream had always been hers to command, and now she understood its true power. As the sun rose in the distance, casting its golden light across the land, Emily knew that the dream was not over. It was just beginning. There were no more forgotten dreams, no more shadows lurking in the corners of her mind. The town, the people, and the memories, everything that had once been lost, was hers to create, to shape, and to live. And with that final thought, the world around her began to settle into its new form. The shadows faded, the dream becoming reality, and Emily stepped into the light, no longer bound by the weight of the past.